Good morning. We are Ayin Beis, Volume 3, continuing our summary toward the conclusion. We are on page 1443, closer to the end of the paragraph, on 2/3 of the way down. To sum up, the learning about Achdus Hashem, which, according to my understanding at least, is talking about Maila Lamata, that appreciating throughout all of existence, both the Yesh and also Oyer, through the Yesh comes to learn that Atzmus is completely removed from everything. Can't even call him the source of light, because he's not defined by being a moir. The sun is defined by being a moir. God, Atzmus is not defined by anything. But we learn this from Ein Arech Lecha Ba'elam Hazeh. And this is called the bitl of Ein Oid. Ein Oid, nothing else. Just as a note, there are two expressions in Veschanon. One is Ata Reis Ladas Ki Hashem Hu Elikim Ein Oid Milvadei. With the word Milvadei, nothing except him. And then there's the pasuk that we have been learning a lot, this Hemshech. V'yadaita Ayin V'shavesa Levavecha Ki Hashem Elikim B'shamayim Mimal V'al Oretz Mitachas Ein Oid. Doesn't have the word Milvadei. And we've been dissecting the Rebbe Rashab throughout the last, from the middle of volume 2 through the middle of volume 3, this verse. So it has similarities to Ata Reisa. Both of them say Hashem Elikim. There are differences, obviously. So in volume 2, he explained that Ata Reisa Ladas is Mamayla Lamata. That's what happened by Matan Torah. God revealed himself. Ata Reisa Ladas. V'yadaita Ayin V'shavesa Levavecha is Mamata Lamayla. You shall know. You shall turn it to your heart. It's your avodah. So he explained clearly in volume 2 that this is the difference between Mamay Lamata and Mamat Lamay. Now we've been learning that in Shema we have both, and in general, Mat Lamay is Tefillah, and Mamay Lamata is Torah, which makes sense. Atar Reis Ladas was by Matan Torah. V'yadaita Ayin V'shavesa Levavecha is more Araveda, like Tefillah. But in Tefillah itself, like we're learning, Shema has both of them, which we'll talk about soon as we continue learning. The point I wanted to talk about a moment was the Ein Oid and Ein Oid Milvadei. So there are two different explanations in Chassidus. That generally speaking, Ein Oid is considered a higher level of bittul. Why? Because Ein Oid means you don't even say Milvadei. Milvadei means without that there's nothing but him. Milvadei, except him. So Chassidus says, except him, but with him, there could be something else. Ein Oid is saying there's nothing, period. So that's one explanation. Sometimes the explanation is the other way around. The Rebbe brings a different explanation that Ein Oid Milvadei is deeper because it's permeating the Ein Oid even in existence. So it's relevant to our discussion in the context of different levels of bittul, but I just wanted to point it out. Here, clearly Ein Oid is the highest level, because he's talking from Atzmus perspective, like he said, that from the point of view of Atzmus, Hakol urak b'chinas Atzmus ve'ein oid milvadei. Now he does use the word milvadei, interestingly, even though he's talking about, and afterwards he uses the word ein oid. So that needs to be analyzed. Why? Maybe he's hinting to the fact that there's two ways to interpret it. Not sure. Doesn't say enough to be able to, but he does say, but the Oyer on its own does not know that today, as we learned. That la'asid lovi, the Oyer will be aware of that. And secondly, the Oyer learns that through the Yesh and through Isavos, because the Oyer on its own is a revealing element. So the Oyer is nothing but Ein Oid Milvadei, you could say, because the Oyer is nothing but bottle to the Ma'ir. But with the Ma'ir, there is Oyer. Oyer is tefes makim from the point of view of the luminary. However, the Yesh teaches us that the Atzmus is higher than being a luminary. And as such, even Oyer is also infinitely distant from Atzmus. So it could be, you could say that Ein Eid Mulvade is from the point of view of Oyer, and Ein Eid is from the point of view of Atzmus. And ultimately, Oyer La'asid Lave will also come to that awareness. La'asid Yenir Ba'er. And the final thing we learned yesterday was Efsher, that this is what we say, that the body will sustain the soul, or the way he put it here is that La'asid Yekabel HaNefesh Ma'aguf, that the spirit, the soul, will receive from the guf, which we learned earlier, that perhaps you can say that's what it means, that the nefesh will receive from the guf. What will it receive? The awareness of this, that perception of this level of einoid, of Atzmus being infinitely distant, even from being a moir, a source of light. Okay, so I mentioned that there were 3 levels of bittul and oir that we discovered. Now it seems to be a 4th level, because then he adds in the parentheses, hu inyan ve'ein deimelach. So what would be the 4 levels? One would be the oir, as it is today, extended outside of Atzmus. So that's the level of ein zul asecha. The oir is bottled to the moir, but it does exist. There's the oir kol ba'atzmusei, which would be the level of oir, what he called efes biltecha, which is going through summing up what he said. He called that efes biltecha in the parentheses. Then there's the oir that is received from the guf, the nefesh from the guf. The oir is recognizing ein eid, and he calls that ein deimelach. And then there's how Atzmus sees it, which is the level of ein eid. So the question is, here he calls it ein deimelach. Before he said, so is ein eid the same as ein deimelach? Ein deimelach? Possible. So then it would only be 3 levels. Why is it called it ein deimelach? Oh, because it doesn't say there the word ein eid. So 3 levels. I'm sorry. I would stick to 3 levels, not 4. Because except that the 3rd level is called ein deimelach. That's how experiences ein eid. Okay. That sums up what we've learned. And just to give a few sources, the idea that the guf, that the nefesh is makabel from the guf, is discussed earlier at the top of page 1210, and at the bottom of page 1276 and on, as well as 1287, and a few other places, just to cross-reference a bit here. Of course, was also... Okay. Let's now continue inside. So we're at the line that begins. The line that begins.
Can I ask you a question about that, Rabbi Jacobson?
Okay, yeah.
How is Ein Domelach seems like a lot lower level than Ein Od. That there's nothing similar to you, but there, I don't know. It seems like
it could seem whatever it says, but that's what the Rebbe Rashab is saying. He says, "V'hu inyan ein deimelach." I mean, that's how he's interpreting it. It's we don't go by our understanding.
So how do we understand that then? Ein Domelach is the same as Ein Od.
It's that it's a lot higher than you think. It's not ein deimelach means there's nothing comparable to you, and he's interpreting that as being how the other experiences that Atzmus, nothing comparable. So ein zul asecha, there's nothing other but than you. Before he said was the bittul that has today, that it senses that God is the only real reality, but exists. Ein eid is that God is the only reality and there's nothing else altogether. And how experiences is he's calling that ein deimelach. That's how he calls it.
Okay.
It's incumbent on us to figure out how those words, but you could interpret it that way. Ein Daimelach doesn't. It's not vernacular in the pedestrian Hebrew. This is a beer of a level. He's defining this level as such. So we just have to explain it that way. That it's much more than you would assume.
Okay.
The thing is, he doesn't elaborate. He just says briefly, I saw here Ein Zulasecha. We have Efes Biltecha, Ein Demelach, and Ein Arech Lecha. Those are the four languages, which actually, I think I referred to it earlier. Where was it earlier? Oh, yeah. Let me go back a moment. 1387. I want to make sure. Now that you bring it up, let me make sure. 1387, on page 1387, he brought all these four levels. I just want to see it for a moment. Yeah, Ein Arech Lecha B'Elam Haza is very clear. Is what that Elam Hazard reveals to us how Atzmus is completely beyond everything. That's clear. Ein Zulasecha La'Elam Haba, he defined as being this level, how Eir senses that Atzmus is the true reality, but there is an Eir. Eir exists. Efes Biltecha is even higher. That's the Eir Kol Batzmusei. He says Efes is higher than Ayin. I'm looking at page 1387. Ayin is Eir Commission B'chinis Yitzia, right? Good. So Ayin would be Eir as it's outside of the source. Efes is how Eir is inside the source. But still, the Efes and Ein Arech Lecha is even higher, he says, than Efes. Is there is a fourth language there, isn't there? Ein Arech Lecha, Ein Zulasecha. Anyone has a siddur? Ein Deimelecha.
Efes Biltecha ve'ein Domelach. Ein Arech Lecha ve'ein Zulasecha.
No, but
Efes
what's the
Biltecha
full language there?
umi
What's the full?
Domelach. Umi Domelach.
Yeah, but what's the full language there? Do you
Ein
have a
Arech
siddur?
Lecha. Yeah, I know about her. Ein Arech Lecha ve'ein Zulasecha. Efes Biltecha umi Domelach.
Okay,
Ein
but
Arech
then,
Lecha Hashem Elokeinu ba'olam hazeh. Ve'ein Zulasecha Malkeinu lechayei ha'olam haba. Efes Biltecha go'aleinu limos ha'mashiach.
and
Ve'ein
and
Dome
then
lecha mosheinu litchias hamesim.
he says it l'tchis hamesim. Yeah, I thought so. So it could be. I'm trying to just extrapolate from that. 1 second. Okay, so Ein Arech Lecha is higher, and then he says, "V'zeh Ein Lecha b'chinas Atzmus." Who kamei she'amar ve'ein deimelach. Okay, on page 1387, I think he equates Ein Deimelach with Ein Arech Lecha. The Ein Arech Lecha, that's why both of them say Lecha. Ein Arech Lecha, Ein Deimelach. Chinas Atzmus. So it could be, since it's connected to Chias HaMesim, and we're saying that the body is teaching this to the soul, so maybe that's what he's saying here, that the Ein Deimelach is the body teaching the soul this level of Einoid. And the addition is that it's the soul that's recognizing it. Ein Arech Lecha is only Elam Hazet. That Yesh is recognizing Atzmus. But the fact that it educates, so-called, informs that bittul of Einoid or Ein Arech Lecha to the Oir and to the Nefesh, maybe that's the addition of Ein Deimelach. That may be what he's saying here. Anyway, I need to look into this a bit more to see if other places, how it's explained. But based on 1387, combined with what we just looked here, it sounds like that. Okay? So
I
in
just
answer,
find it track the levels. I'm not.
So in answer to your question, Eliezer, on 1387, he clearly says Ein Deim Loch, especially the word Loch, using the word Loch, because Ein Areich Lecha and Ein Deim, they both use the word Lecha or Loch, which is Atzmus. Efes Biltecha, you don't use the word Loch or Lecha. And the same thing with Ein Zilosecha. So the word Lecha is a critical word because it means Lecha to you, Atzmus. Just pointing that out. So I think that may be the real diuk here. Okay.
Yeah. So there's four or levels or three.
There are four levels in the tefillah and in the way it's interpreted. Yeah, there are four levels. I was saying there are three levels of bitl in the oyer, but there are four levels overall. These are the four levels we just described.
Mm-hmm.
We have the Elam Haza, we have the Enzel of Secha, that's oyer outside of the Atzem. Efes B'Techa is oyer within the Etzem, and then Ein Demelach would be oyer as it's receiving the Ein Eid or Ein Arech Lecha of from the Guf, from the Yesh.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way it appears. Yeah.
That's interesting.
So next time on Shabbos, when you daven, you got your kavana lined up.
Right.
Kavana.
So, Ein Domalach, so Exa, Exa Elaka, Basari, Exa Melaka is Ein Domalach.
I don't know. No. I did not say that, and it doesn't say that here, and I don't think that's correct either.
Really?
Okay.
Is there anything to be made of the Lach versus Lach, and Lach it may refer to the Shekhinah? I know that's just from way out in outer space, but
no, I would not bring that here at all.
No. So why the differences
between what Loch and Lecha?
Yes.
I don't know. It doesn't explain that here. Maybe somewhere else he may explain it, but it doesn't say anything here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in Hebrew, why wouldn't you say Ein Doim Lecha? You say Ein Doim Loch, and you say Ein Arech Lecha. There a Hebrew is. I mean, is that a digduk thing? Not even sure. It's interesting diuk. Okay, this needs to be researched in other places because it doesn't say anything here that would help us indicate the reason for that. So we do know whenever it says lecha, it often means la'atzmuscha, lecha, to like lech lecha, la'atzmuscha. It's always connected. The cha meaning to you, to your essence. That's for sure.
And what did we say?
And lach would be the same thing here in this case.
But what level did we say is Ein Dome Lach?
What? Excuse me.
What level did we say? What was the hashva? What was the comparison?
1387. He says, Ein Demelach is the level of Atzmis, which connects to Ein Arech Lecha of Elam Haza, Keich Atzmus. But it's clearly the way Keich Atzmus of Elam Haza is transferred over to the Oyer, that the Oyer should feel that. That looks like the addition of Ein Demelach.
Mm-hmm. I just was thinking that Shekhinah is lower than Kutchabrichu, and I don't know.
I would not make any connection to that at all. It's complete speculation.
Okay.
Kutchabrichu and Shekhinah has many levels. What level are we talking about here? There's the Kutchabrichu and Shekhinah goes through the whole Seder Shtalshlus.
Well, it's just a matter of which direction you're comparing, and if you're saying that
anyway,
Atzmus,
I'm just telling you that leap. What based on what? What we have nothing. How do you know which level is which? Any level could be Kutchabricha, any level could be Shekhinah, because we learned that's relative. So
I thought you said Ein Dome Lach is. Well, let's skip it. I'm confused.
I would not be Kutchabricha and Shekhinah right here because you could interpret it on any level. Kutchabricha and Shekhinah. Kutchabricha and Shekhinah could be Zah Malchus. It could be Hu and Shmoi. So yeah. So V'nimtza. Let's continue now. the line and the parentheses of who inyan ein demelach benimtze. So now he's going to conclude the piece that began at the bottom of 1441. Remember that Shema is klolos kol mitzvos. First reason why, because the halah of Shema, elevating existence to achdus, to echad, is what causes the yichud of Kudsha Bricha and Shchinta, as we learned on page 1441. But then he said, yichud Kudsha Bricha and Shchinta on all the levels, from the highest levels to the lowest levels. Then he said, "Bagam b'krishma gufi yesh halah of amshacha." And he started speaking about the yichud mamat lamayla and the yichud mamayla lamat. Now he's going back to that. So he says, "V'nimtza sheyesh b'krishma." So in Krishma, when we talk about Hashem Echad, chinas halah of amshacha, we have both aspects: the elevation and the transmission. The Allah b'pchinas Atzmus ein sof. The Allah reaches all the way to Atzmus ein sof, like we've been learning, not just to the levels of Giluyim, revelations, and higher worlds, but all the way to Atzmus ein sof. Elov v'leila midei sof. Remember back on 1441, he said that Shema speaks to Elov and not to his attributes, to God himself and not his attributes. Shemin Esrei, there the emphasis is bringing it down the Amshacha into the, what he called L'chavin b'shem, Shem Havaya with a patach, the comets, the different kavanas, the different blessings of the Shemin Esrei that draw down the divine, reveal the divine within his attributes. But Shema is a love v'leila midei sof, halah all the way to Atzmus ein sof. V'hu yichud mamata l'mayla. That's the yichud mamat l'mayla. As we go from the bottom up, we elevate existence all the way to these highest levels. And the v'amshachihi, as he said, gam kem b'chinas atzmus ein sof. We're talking about Amshacha, we want to see it from God's perspective, not how we climb the ladder and reach the highest levels of Atzmus ein sof, but we see it from Atzmus ein sof. It is also from Atzmus ein sof. Shehu inyan, shezeh inyan rather, kad amlichtei l'maylo l'mato. Like he said at the top of the previous page, that mamaylo l'mato is kad amlichtei, is when we establish God's sovereignty, malchus, above and below, and he called that the meyichud l'maylo l'mato. L'maylo l'mato. So now he's going to come back and explain how all this is captured in the 248 words of Shema. Remember, that's how it all began when he started speaking about the Ramach. At the bottom of page 1435. Just a second. Yeah, he's talking about the neshamas that reach all the way into the etzem. And he started Krishma Yeshna Mach Tevin. They have 248 words, which correspond to the 248 king organs of the king. Malka Zah, Malka Kadisha. And then he connected it to the mitzvahs, which also have the 248 positive mitzvahs, which correspond to the 248 organs as well. Because the mitzvahs connect the yichud kudsha bricha v'shchinta, like the Evarim, they're one with the king himself. They're part of him, the organs. And Shema is klolos kol mitzvahs. So now he's going to go back to explain that connection. So he says like this. So just let me sum up before I continue. So Shema captures the idea of yichud, unification, both from the bottom up and from the top down, and encompasses everything we've learned, the highest levels, all the way to Ein Arech Lecha of Atzmus Ein Sof, that yichud should be felt also in Ishtalshlus, in and the whole Ishtalshlus ultimately. in all the levels, the highest levels to the lowest levels. And as such, Shema is therefore the essence of the entire experience because it creates that level of unity. And you have to say that based on what we learned earlier about the advantage of each of these two, Mamat Lamaila is more integrated. Mamayla Lamata is a higher level of divine experience. When you have the combination of both, you have the Etzem Begili, you have both the highest levels of unity that Atzmus is the only reality, as the Yesh reveals, and at the same time, it's felt and experienced as it will be lost in love, like we learned, in the fullest sense of the word, that even the Oyer itself, which is Gilui, will also sense that level of beyond Gilui, basically revealing that which is beyond revelation. And the Etzem, which is beyond it all, is being expressed in our very beings. That's the ultimate seamless unity that will only be l'asulav, as we're going to learn later, the yichud of both yichudim, of yichud tata and yichud elah. So that is, in essence, what he's saying here in this one sentence here. And now he continues and says like this: V'zein ramach tevin de krishma. And this is the meaning behind the fact that there are 248 words in Shema. When we say Shema, it means from Shema all the way through Baruch Shem and V'ahavta and V'hoyes Advarim Me'ela all the way to Emes. 248 words. Shehin Amshachas B'chinas Shir Kema Ramach Evarim de Malka. This is referring to not just reaching Atzmus, but in a way that it manifests. The Amshacha, the Shir Kema, is an expression in Kabbalah and in different places. It means the full structure. Kema is like the height of something, but Shir Kema means the full structure of what? Of a human being. When you say the full structure, you feel about all the 248 organs that a person has in the human. Lamaila is the Shir Kema of the Ramach Evarim de Malka. So you have the entire structure permeated with this level of unity. So Shema, in other words, is ultimately not just reaching Atzmus Ein Sof, but that Atzmus Ein Sof should be manifest within the Shir Kema of the Ramach Evarim de Malka, which is essentially what all mitzvahs do, because that's the total of the 248 positive mitzvahs. The Kamoi, just like we learned earlier, again, back on page 1441. So we talked about mitzvahs. He said, for example, mitzvahs tefillin. So what did we learn out derech mashal? So for example, mitzvahs tefillin. Nizbar li'il, on page 1441, we learned earlier, sha'odam amaniach tefillin, when a person puts on tefillin, lamata, below, mamshir b'chinas ha'moichin de malka kadisha. So the tefillin that you put on, your mamshich, the moichin. Moichin is one of the evarim of the mind of the king, of the holy king. That's what tefillin does. And the same thing, every mitzvah associates with another one of the 248 organs. So it's mamshich moichin de malka kadisha b'chinas kudsha brichu, which we learned is the level of kudsha brichu, b'chinas zah datzilis. So essentially, the adam lamata, when he's putting on tefillin, he's drawing from zah of atzilus into malchus, into the person down below. That's the Odam Atach. Then we learned the second interpretation, if you recall, when the Kotshabrichu Maniach film. So he said, Uba Odam Elyon, and what happens above? The same type of unity happens throughout the entire Seder Shtalshus. Odam Elyon, Imshim Bechinis Kotshabrich, Shalamayla Adresh Kol Dargan. That Zah gets Amshachim from Keser, as is a second interpretation that he gave on page 1441. And the same thing, level after level after level. So what do we see? That mitzvah, one mitzvah even does that. When we talk about all 248 mitzvahs, then you have the Shir Kema. And Shema encompasses that all, because that's the whole purpose of Shema, is the yichud of the highest levels of Elikuz into existence, whether it's mamat lamayla or mamayla lamat. Kamay kain, so that's in one individual mitzvah. Kamay kain, hu b'mitzvahs krishma. So too is it with mitzvahs krishma in a more general sense. Shanimshach b'chinas kudsha brichu adrei mamaylas. that Kudsha Brichu is nimshach from the highest levels, like we learned, because Krishna reaches all the way into Elov, V'leila Midesov, to the highest levels, which is all the way the highest levels of Kudsha Brichu. Like he said also at the bottom of page 1441. So it's all summing up, it's tying together the last 3 pages and bringing it all together now. That's also, so the same thing with Krishna. The Zeu, the Krishna, and this is the meaning, that Krishna, who klolos ha-mitzvahs, that Krishna is not one mitzvah, it encompasses all the mitzvahs. The Mashanasai, they call mitzvah befrat, because this yichud, this unification that happens through every individual mitzvah, nasai de Krishna b'chlal, happens through Krishna in a general way. So you see now how Krishna is so central. So you still need mitzvahs because Krishna is still in a general form of it. But Krishna encompasses the general kavanah of Yichud Kudsha Brichu V'Shchinta on all levels. Then the individual mitzvahs, each of them focus on a particular level, whether it's tefillin with moichin, or tzedakah with chesed, or the same with all the 248 positive mitzvahs, each correspond to another organ. So Shema encompasses that whole picture, which this adds a tremendous dimension. When we learned the Maimer HaMagbil L'Sheves from the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe, and we spoke about Shema, and then he spoke about Ner Mitzvah and Teirah, so you see now something that doesn't say there explicitly in the Maimer, why Shema is so critical to the whole picture. And you could say Shema is one mitzvah, but Shema is the central, and that's why when the Nefesh Elikis contemplates on Shema, on the Achdus of Hashem, like we've been learning, when it's Mamat L'mayla Mayla L'mato, what happens is, it is educating, training the animal soul, V'haftas Hashem L'kech B'chol L'vavcha B'shnei Yitzarecha, that also the animal soul, the oil, should be transformed to fuel, that fuels the fire, the fiery love of the oir. And then he goes on to explain how that is enhanced by Ner Mitzvah and Teirah. But now we also understand the other way around, that Shema prepares the ground for it all, because that's what he says there in the Maimer, that to get to Ner Mitzvah Teirah, you need Shema first. So even though on one hand you need mitzvahs, like we need talis and tefillin before we say Shema, on the other hand, it's the Shema that prepares the ground and also creates this general unity from the highest to the lowest levels, as he's explaining here. So ultimately, they work together. He doesn't spell all this out here. I'm bringing this in because this is from the Maimer in the Hamagbil L'Sheves, and it'll also help us understand some of the things we're going to learn later when he goes back to that Maimer about the connection to Ner Mitzvah V'Teirah. He doesn't say that here. But remember, this is the context that we're talking about Teirah that began on page 1350, Amshachah Mamayla L'Mata, which followed the explanation before Mamat L'Mayla. And now he's explaining how Shema brings it all together. So Teirah is ultimately really Mamayla L'Mata. Ner Mitzvah, as we've discussed, has an element of Mamayla L'Mata, Mamat L'Mayla. And now Shema has also both elements, but Shema is even more central because it's the central mitzvah of all mitzvahs, like he just explained. So that which you accomplish through an individual mitzvah, in Shema you accomplish in general terms. So that creates a deeper connection between Shema. So Shema is like an all-encompassing mitzvah that encompasses the central theme of all mitzvahs, which is uniting Kudsha Brichu V'Shchinta, uniting God with existence, or the higher levels of godliness with the lower levels of godliness as they manifest and relate to existence. Okay, let me stop if there are any questions.
I was wondering, in truth, Shema only has 245 words, and that's why we have to add 3 words. And the Ramah, the Shulchan Aruch talk about the different ways of adding the 3 words. The Chazan repeats the 3 words. I was just wondering if there's any discussion in this in Chassidus about that fact, the 245 versus the additional 3 words that we have to do. Are they showing 3 different levels that have to be added to it or something?
I believe there is explanation of it. I have to find it where. I would have to go through the indexes or Sefer Likutim from Tzemach Tzedek. But yeah, it's worthwhile looking. When I have some time, I'll look. But anybody can really look it up. But that's a good point. But But the Chazal do say it's Ramach, and you're right. They try to figure out how you add how the two, where the three others come from, the three other words come from. But it'd be interesting to see what they are. Yeah.
And they also state that a woman has, I think, 4 extra limbs in her body that a man doesn't have. So I was wondering if
Reish Nun Beis, yes.
Ayin Beis. So I was wondering if that's brought down if in Al Pi
That's for
Chassidus,
sure discussed as well. Yes, that's also a Mishnah. It's also from the Chazal. It talks about in Mishnah in Gemara and Mishnah. But in Chassidus, I believe it talked about. Shouldn't be hard to find. Go to Sefer Lekutim, look at the numbers 248, Misparim or Shema, or this idea, or the Ramach, or Mitzvos maybe, where they talk about the Evarim also regarding Mitzvos, because women also have Mitzvos, even though they're part of from Mitzvah Shazmangram, but they still have Mitzvah. So how does that work with the 248 and 252? I believe that I'm almost sure there's a Maimarim that talk about how the 4 extra ones are encompassed in the 248, and they just broken down in more detail in the woman in Malchus. Remember, Ramach, like he said, is a Varim de Malka, the king, not the queen. So Malka is Zah, Malka without a hey, Malka with it's an Aramaic, like Melech. So that may be connected also to it. So we have to see what that means.
And the 4 additional organs are reproductive organs, if I remember. Is that correct?
I'm almost sure, yes. Even though some people feel their wives have 3 eyes, but I think it means more. and 4 ears. I have to look it up. It's discussed. I'm offhand. I don't recall. I would have to look it up.
And my final question here is: we learned earlier what was a very big kiddush for me was that in Shema Yisrael, the Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, we have Yichud Allah and Yichud Tata. Hashem Elokeinu is Yichud Allah, Hashem Echad, Yichud Tata. I was wondering, we say that this is Shema is the Klaus of mitzvahs, and it has 248, comparing to all of them, the 248 positive mitzvahs. I was wondering, just like we say in Anochi Hashem Elokecha, the Seres of Dibros includes everything, and it goes back to the Aleph, and then the Kotza Shel Yud. If it's brought down in Chassidus anywhere about that everything, all the 248 words of Shema can be brought down to the, I don't know how many words, I guess there are 5 words in Shema, but is there any discussion about that? How it's brought down to just Shema Yisrael itself?
I hear you. I don't know if I've ever seen that it's connected to the amount of words. The theme, yes, the themes of Shema, of like you said, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. But I don't know about the actual amount of words. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, 6 words, right? Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. I'd have to look. It's possible. Even if it's not in Chassidus, it may be in Kabbalah, maybe other Sfarim. But look, Eliezer, I don't know how much free time you have, but it's a little research that's needed here. And anyone can really look it up. I mean, as I said, I'll at my free, if I have any free moment, I'll look it up. But or Shabbos maybe. But it shouldn't be difficult to find. We also have our resident researcher,
Yitzhak.
Yeah. Well, I've been at it. Were we wondering what were the 4 extra mitzvahs that women have?
No, the 4 extra limbs.
Oh, okay.
The mitzvahs, I don't know. We have to look if there are 4 extra mitzvahs.
Well, the mitzvahs are Chala, Nida, Hadlakas Neros, and Sneas.
Where did you see that?
Well, that's ChatGPT. I don't, I have to double check.
Okay. It's a Beferish ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yitzhak, can you check to see ChatGPT 6 words?
Let's leave that for.
Okay.
No, we don't need to. We can leave that for later. It's not so relevant to our. I want to finish the paragraph here. So let me continue learning. Okay. Now he says something else. Additionally, the Gam. And now he goes back to another point. So the first point he just made which earlier was the second point, that Krishma captures the central theme of all mitzvahs. Begam, sham shochash ayidei mitzvahs. Another thing that Shema does is that the hamshacha that mitzvahs do, because each mitzvah is a hamshacha. When you do a mitzvah, you're drawing down divine energy. Hu ayidei halaw de Krishma. Like we learned, that's the first point we learned on page 1441. So in addition to the fact that Shema is central, the 248 words of Shema capture the central theme of the 248 mitzvahs, which is Yichud, it's also that through the halah of Shema, it actually, that the hamshachah of mitzvahs comes through the halah of Shema. It's an additional point. Second. Yeah. And then finally he says, V'zeu de neshamas Yisrael ha'idei mitzvahs. And this is, to sum up, when we talk now, remember, mitzvahs and Shema, without a neshama, are just instruments. So you need now the neshama to come into the picture to do this. Someone has to say Shema. Someone has to think about the Shema. Someone has to contemplate on it. And also a mitzvah. A mitzvah is not done on its own. So he says, this is the role, neshamas Yisrael, through mitzvahs. And in general, through Krishma, through the Aveda, the Krishma, b'derech klal, the Aveda, the Krishma, like we said, b'derech klal, boim lashtaba begufa de malka. He's now taking us back to words that he used all the way back on page 14, let me see, 1437. I'm sorry, no. 1435. So remember, there was the expression that the malachim only reach the dibur of Hashem, and neshamas reach l'shtaba begufa de malka means to be absorbed in the very king, in the very body of the king. So think of it like the difference between a student and a child. A student can be very connected with his teacher, but ultimately it's not the DNA of the teacher. They're not biologically one, like a parent and a child. So the connection is more through the learning. It could be even deeper than the learning, just connection of a Talmud and a Rav. But when you talk about a child, like he says in Ayin Beis of Tanya, chapter 2 in Tanya, that chelik elikam mal mamish bonim atem laHashem elokechem b'nei b'cher Yisrael, he says the child comes from the etzem moyach ha'av. The neshamas are rooted not just in the seichel of the teacher. The very seichel itself of the child comes from the seichel of the parent. In that case, so the neshama is a very piece of godliness. And that's why when the Shamis Yisrael do the Aveda, it's on the highest level, Ishtaba begufa de Malka. They're actually like uniting with the goof of the Melech, which of course is connected here because it's through the Evarim that we do that. When you do a mitzvah, so you put on tefillin on your head, your mind is connecting so-called to the divine mind. When you give tzedakah, your chesed and your hand actually, giving chesed, doing chesed, is connecting and aligning itself with so-called God's hand. And the same with every mitzvah. There's a sefer called Sefer Charedim, where he talks about how which mitzvah corresponds to which limb. Every limb and organ in the human body has a corresponding mitzvah. Literally. There's mitzvahs that connect to the legs, to the arms, to the liver, to the heart, to the brain, of course, to the mind, to every part of a person. And there's actually spells out which limb and organ corresponds to which mitzvah. Shema is klolos kol ha-mitzvahs. So the Shema is generally encompasses this theme of unification. So we have this beautiful picture here in the Neshamas Yisrael through mitzvahs, and in general through Avedas Krishma. He says, "Boim nishtaba beguf de malka." They arrive, they connect, they are binding themselves with the king himself, the child, or the neshama down below, who could have been doing something on their own agenda and living their own personal life, is binding itself with the goof of the melech. Chinas kutshe brichu. That's the level of Kudsha B'richu. Shezeo B'chinas Mahus, and we learned Kudsha B'richu goes all the way up to the highest levels. B'chinas Mahus v'Atzmus Ein Sof Shelamayla B'chinas Er V'Gilui. That's higher than any Er V'Gilui, like we learned. In Arech Lecha, we learned that Atzmus is higher than Er and Gilui altogether. V'zeu b'yechelis neshamas Yisrael. And this is only in the capacity, doesn't say only, but this is the capacity of the souls of Israel. Because they are rooted in that highest level in Atzmus. Commission is bar le'il, as we discussed earlier, as was explained earlier, al kain b'yecholtam. That's why they have the capacity, b'aveidosam, through their aveda, through their work, l'shtabe beguful demalka, to bind themselves and to absorb and be completely integrated, united with Gufa Demalka B'chinas Atzmus Ein Sof. So you see two things here. The Neshamas Yisrael are rooted there, and that's why they have the capacity to go there. But they do so through Mitzvos and through Shema. So you could ask, why do we need Mitzvos and Shema? And he's going to address that. We've already addressed it, because like I said, once the Neshama comes down below, it's concealed. The Neshama has the capacity, but it's like saying a Neshama without education, without teachers, without anyone guiding or educating it and training it, how far could it go? It could go to a certain extent. So it's ultimate in the neshamas that are rooted in the highest level, but they need we learned the siyua, and here the siyua of Torah mitzvahs and of Shema and so on. So yes, you could say a neshama, as soon as you wake up in the morning, the neshama is rooted in Atzmus. So why do we have to say Maidani? And why do we have to say brachas? And why do we have to daven? And why do we have to say Shema? Why do we have to do mitzvahs? Because the neshama is going to remain in a concealed state. It's going to remain in a dormant state. Now, can a neshama on its own, without any avodah, come to any awareness? So first of all, awareness itself is already an avodah. But we discussed that. Of course, the neshama has some consciousness. That's why you can find someone living on an island and maybe never learned anything, and they still can come and recognize that there's some higher force in life called God. But it's going to be very limited of how far you can reach on your own, as we discussed. The point being is, it's ultimately a joining of many factors here. The Neshamas Yisrael, learning Torah, doing mitzvahs, saying Shema, with all that we've learned here. We didn't mention Torah here per se, Torah. We'll get to that. That's going to be discussed later. And really, actually, the Rebbe Rashab never really gets back to Torah. That's one of the reasons we're learning all this, because we learn about Torah and the other Maimonim that help us understand where the Rebbe Rashab may have gone with it. But the general picture is as I just described it, and it's pretty clear from when you learn the whole context. So we finished the paragraph. The next continuation is going to ask the question, if that's the case, so why do we need malachim to help us? Why do we need a support system? The Neshamas Yisrael are rooted in the highest levels. So though he answered that, he's going to elaborate more about that. But that's the next section. So I'll stop here, and I'll take questions. And but this was a very fundamental piece, because he's bringing together a lot of the earlier themes and also connecting it to Shema and, of course, to Neshamas. So the plot is emerging, shall we say. Okay. The floor is yours if anybody wants to ask anything.
I have a question about the operation of the performance of the Ramach Mitzvos Aseh, which are, as we just discussed at length, methods of unifying ourselves with God, with the highest level, and vice versa, and seeing essentially creating these yichudim, which is making this world a dira by bringing Atzmus or an Atzmustic perspective into this lowest of worlds. We're making it a dira. But if without a Beis Hamikdash, there are many mitzvahs aseh that we cannot perform. A little bit of a catch-22. If we want to bring the third Beis Hamikdash, the Gula Shlema Mitis, we can't we have to perform all the mitzvahs. We can't perform all the mitzvahs without it. It's a little bit of a paradox.
So you're asking me, how do we do it without being able to perform all the mitzvahs?
Yeah, basically.
The answer is very straightforward. This is a question that's asked in many places. And firstly, we have spiritually the ability to do all the mitzvahs, like tefillah, b'mkeim karbonos tiknu. So we can't bring offerings, so the tefillah replaces the offerings. Everything that was there in the Beis Hamikdash, we have some corresponding avodah ruchnius. That's number one. Number two, Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, question goes even further. There are mitzvahs, even in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, there's a mitzvah that are only on the melech. Part of the 248 mitzvahs include mitzvahs that are only for certain individuals. Kohanim, for example, eat truma, as Yisrael does not. There are mitzvahs that are connected to a king that are not connected to others. So there are mitzvahs that men do and women don't do. And there's mitzvahs women do and men don't do. And the answer is because all Jewish people are all one big nation, so when someone does it, they're being to everyone else through their avodah. So bottom line is that all the 248 hamshachas are happening one way or another.
Thank you.
What is the literal word meaning of ishtaba? You typed it as absorbed. Does it literally mean to come into the body of the king?
Actually, I took the word absorbed from Rab Shlomo on our class here. He felt it meant the word absorbed. I was thinking lishtaba can also come from the word like shibud, but I think he didn't think that was the root of it. Shibud would mean being bound to, like like eved, like you're like lishtaba. But I think he's correct. I think it's like from the word she'iva, which also can mean to draw from. But I think I would have to research it more. I think it comes from the word being attached to or bound to or absorbed in. Lishtaba, the guf of the malka. But I'm not positive what the exact Hebrew three words, every Hebrew word is rooted in a three words root. What the three words are, whether it's sha'av or lishtaba, not sure.
It's Aramaic, isn't it?
Again, this needs to be a little looked up. Huh?
Is this Aramaic or Hebrew, ishtaba?
Ishtaba is Aramaic, but all Aramaic is connected usually to Hebrew words. So I think
I was thinking,
generally speaking, words that end with an aleph is already the Aramaic version. Like melech is Hebrew, malka with an aleph is Aramaic. Not always. So Aramaic sometimes is really Hebrew just with a twist. There are words that are completely Aramaic, but they're usually connected.
I was thinking that it might be related to the Aleph, which means to come into, to bring. I think in Aramaic.
Well,
Abba.
What's the word in Hebrew? What word are you referring to?
I think it's an Aramaic word that means to bring.
It's brought bringing, like she'iva, like drawing water.
I mean, no, like entering. Aleph, like to have come into something.
Well, you know what? I don't want to talk without researching it. And I think the expression is brought in Tanya, and there are translations. So this is, as a writer, you research it.
Okay.
Anyway, I
think it's important. It's important to try to get an exact understanding of that word. It's a very critical word.
Yeah, that's true.
My other question was we have a number of mitzvahs that are shaveh, they'll call them mitzvahs, like tefillin or tzitzis or maybe Talmud Torah. The Rebbe's here is focusing on Shema. So can we learn anything from this to the other mitzvahs, or is this within the mitzvahs that are compared to all the mitzvahs? They comprise all the mitzvahs. This is unique. It has a unique aspect that the other ones don't have. Like tefillin or
that's the whole point. That's the whole point. He brought it. It's not the Rebbe Rashab's chiddush. On page 1441, he brought a pasuk. It says, "V'zeis hamitzvah asher tziva Hashem lasis ba'aretz," and then he continues in the pasuk and says he only mentions Krishma. So Chazal derive from that Krishma is klolos kol mitzvahs. There are mitzvahs that encompass all the mitzvahs. So here we're talking about the uniqueness of Shema. encompasses all 248 mitzvahs. And he explained why. Because the central theme of Shema is Achdus of Yichud Kudsha Bricha V'Shchinta, which each particular mitzvah. But this is, you find with other mitzvahs, there are mitzvahs that are called mitzvah klolius, that encompass all mitzvahs. In this context, yes, Shema is absolutely unique. It's not just another mitzvah. Shema is, that's why it's such a fundamental, you know how many times we say Shema every day? And why Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu is referred to so often? Because it's the central theme of all mitzvahs. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That's what he's saying here.
Right. And the other ones that are also compared to all the mitzvahs.
I mean, you want to do, are you doing now like a research paper on comparing? He's talking here about Shema. Why is one does not minimize? It's not a competition. I mean, sometimes it says that mitzvahs is daka, shkula, is shkula keneged Talmud Torah keneged kula. Right? There's expressions shtuk is shkula keneged kol mitzvahs. Sometimes says mezuzah shkula keneged kol mitzvahs. You're going to find expressions about different mitzvahs that they say sometimes they like all the mitzvahs or they are connected to all the mitzvahs. Shema is unique in its own way, and he calls it klolos kol mitzvahs. You mentioned before, for example, anoichi and layir lecha. The Alter Rebbe brings in Tanya, Noichi encompasses all the positive mitzvahs. Layir lecha, the Isser of Avodah Zarah encompasses all the negative mitzvahs. So yeah, you'll have different expressions in different places. Here is exclusively discussing Shema, not other mitzvahs in that sense. Is that what you're asking?
In Tanya, it's referred to just as the mitzvah. I understand in your Shalmi, which I don't know well
That's
at all.
That's what he says in chapter 37. Yeah.
Right. So it's just saying, it's so interesting.
Yeah, but okay, so. I see they interpret the Alter Rebbe teaches lishtaba ledofka by Yisbarach, to bind itself. Like I said, yeah, a type of dveikus, like connecting. Like when somebody hugs somebody. I just saw that here. You hear what I'm saying? When someone hugs someone.
Yes.
So it's more than just learning with them. It's an embrace that's somewhat like that. That's what he says here. I have to find the exact lashon. Right. Okay. Form of Devekus. Not sure what the exact word was. Taba. Yichud Nifla. Okay, I'll look it up more. Are there any other questions? Any other questions? No? Okay, so we'll stop here. End of paragraph, the bottom of page 1443. Let's stop the recording. Uh-oh. Did the YouTube never go?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, Rabbi. I could not find it. I see that it's recording, but